PACO's first video podcast entitled Risk Management Demystified. I'm honored today to have with me as a guest Tim McManus, an industry giant who's worked on every continent on this globe except Antarctica. Tim was honored to be inducted into the National Academy of Construction and was recently appointed by the New York MTA as an industry expert in their construction review unit. Tim was a vice president in capital projects and infrastructure practice for McKinsey & Company based in Boston. He also was a senior vice president and director of global project and program management for AECOM. He's also taught courses at Harvard. He's currently an adjunct associate professor at Columbia Graduate School of Engineering. Tim is also running his own practice at TC McManus Consulting. We're delighted to have him talk with us a little bit about risk management and his insights and experience based on his wealth of global and local experience. Tim, would you like to kind of walk us through how you got into risk management and sort of a journey of your career path?
When you think back, when you asked the question about starting in risk management, I go back to May of 1999, before I really knew what risk management was. I was just retained or hired by the owner of the New England Patriots, Robert Kraft, to be the project director for the development of Gillette Stadium. And Mr. Kraft was very clear. He says, we have a couple of parameters that we need to work within. First of all, our total budget, he says that it's my money. Our total budget is $325 million. You can't go above that. We have to be ready for the 2002 season, so we have to open on time. And we can't experience any of the problems that other stadiums have experienced. So we said, okay. So I worked very closely with the management team there, with our outside attorney, Steve Coleman, their general counsel, Dick Karolitz, another industry legend, David Hayden, another famous attorney. We did evaluations of all of the recently completed stadiums to see what issues they had, what problems they had, what risks they had. How could we mitigate that? How could we prevent that? We structured a very comprehensive owner-controlled insurance program. We also included a professional liability program as part of that as well. We had a very extensive safety program, and we diligently managed this as we went through the entire project in order to mitigate and prevent what had plagued other projects before. So before I ever knew the term risk management per se, we were actively practicing it. We finished the project with the stadium completed on budget at $325 million. We moved the team into the new stadium on May 1st of 2002 for the 2002 season, and the stadium is still standing and going strong.
Bravo. And then from that experience, you started delving more, from that success, you started delving more into risk management as a profession or as a discipline? Well,
after my work with the Patriots, I moved to AECOM, where I was the global director of program management. And I learned risk management through a couple of the industry experts. Bob Rocco had been the risk manager for AECOM on 2nd Avenue Subway and was an expert in the field. And Bob Rocco really was the first one that showed me the discipline of risk management. Eduardo Gamez finished his PhD at Northeastern University. He came into AECOM and took over as another risk manager. And the two of them really showed me the processes, the procedures, the methodologies, the terminology, and really indoctrinated me on how risk management can be applied and has to be applied for major capital programs.
Now, you were working at AECOM. You were at the global level. You were working on not only in New York or in the U.S., you were working abroad as well?
That's correct. We started working here in the United States, but then as AECOM, as you know, is a global company. So I worked with all of our affiliates around the world, helping to develop major projects, major infrastructure projects, sports projects, major development programs in the Middle East, in the UK and London, We did work in Asia, we did work in Australia, and we applied the same techniques. And we tried to normalize our methodologies for program management and in particular risk management to be applied across all major projects so that we were doing it in a consistent way. In 2003, I believe it was, one of my favorite authors, Professor Ben Flyberg, who at that time was at Oxford, published his book, Mega Projects and Risk, which was the first real primer on risk management. At that time, it was not a part of the lexicon of project management. And I found that book fascinating because he had done a study of major capital programs all around the world, found out what went wrong, what happened, why did they go over budget, why did they go over schedule, and how you need to apply a risk management philosophy in order to mitigate those types of behaviors.
Interesting that you mentioned that because, often why we entitle this podcast as Risk Management Demystified, in my career span, I've noticed sometimes when the risk management is introduced the first time with an organization or an entity or an individual, sometimes the eyes roll or you get deer in the headlights look. And I just wanted to get your insight on how people have embraced risk management and why you feel it could be demystified.
That's an interesting way to put it like that, It's funny to do this because last night at my course at Columbia, my lecture was on risk management, so the timing was perfect. And the first thing I said to my students, and when you look at risk management, I said, when you wake up in the morning, you plan your day out, you figure out how long is it going to take me to commute, do I have enough money in my wallet, are my cards charged up, is my phone battery charged? We manage risk in our personal life every day, but we don't consider it risk management, right?
Right.
And so that discipline that we apply in our personal lives, we need to apply to our professional lives as well, because we've all seen how projects go bad. When I was at McKinsey, we did a study of mega projects across all asset classes. And it showed on average, these mega projects over $1 billion of CapEx, on average would be completed 60% over schedule, the original schedule,
wow,
and 70% over budget. These are all projects that have been done before, that we have completed, whether it's a rail station, whether it's an airport, whether it's a port, whether it's a road or a bridge. They've all been done before. Yet inherently, these projects go over budget and they go over schedule because of the same types of failures. So learning from those projects and applying those systematically is a methodology that needs to be done in order to achieve success.
Very interesting. I want to dive into one of your publications back in 2016. It was entitled Delivering Major Infrastructure Projects, How to Radically Improve Productivity and Overall Performance Infrastructure Intelligence. On the heels of what you just said, this is what you wrote, which is really interesting. Infrastructure has a problem. Delays and cost overruns are common, just like you mentioned. Poor planning and execution, unbalanced contracts, inadequate controls, and ineffective risk management are rife. Productivity has been subpar, innovation slow, and margins thin. Simply put, the current approach is not working. The industry needs to accelerate innovation, including the use of digital solutions. That may sound obvious, but research has found that construction sector to be a technological laggard with low levels of digitization and R&D spending. Our research has shown that emerging technologies could boost productivity by 25 to 30%. That is frightening that was written in 2016. Do you feel that, and it's incredibly accurate, do you feel that the industry has the needle moved since you wrote this article?
Well, Fred, if you look from World War II, productivity in the construction industry here in the U.S. has stayed virtually flat. Whereas in every other major industry, banking, finance, manufacturing, whatever it may be, productivity has increased significantly. But this is a very labor-intensive industry. The construction industry, the global construction industry, represents about 13% of global GDP. It's the largest ecosystem in the world. However, it's the most fragmented industry in the world. If you look at the United States alone, one of my colleagues at Columbia University, Professor Ibrahim Odeh, did a study, and he determined that in the United States, there are over 710,000 engineering, architectural, and construction companies. Only 2% of them have over 100 employees or more. So a lot of small companies, a lot of fragmentation. If you look at any major construction project, if you look at the number of consultants involved, the number of designers involved, sub-consultants involved, subcontractors, suppliers, all with a separate contract, all with a separate purchase order, all with a separate value proposition, to manage all that and control all that becomes significant. From a digitalization standpoint, what we saw when we did our study at McKinsey was that the global construction industry had the lowest level of investment in technology and research and development than any other industry except for hunting. And when you look at that and you look at the why, I ask my students all the time, why do you think that is? And they eventually get to the realization that the margins in our industry for construction companies and engineering companies is single digits, very low single digits many times. So there's not a lot of money to put back into the business like there are in many other industries. And I counter that. I say, I think that's true, but I also think there's a generational factor. If you look at our industry right now, there are 5 generations working in our industry right now. My generation is the one that has been running most of these companies, not my children's generation. My generation did not grow up with technology. We did not see the value proposition in technology. So the idea of making major investments of millions of dollars in a business that has low margins to begin with was not inherently understood by my generation, I'll say. So when you look at companies that have transformed leadership to a younger generation, they've made that sense. They understand technology, they see that value proposition, and they willingly make the investment in order to see the results. And the companies that have done it, like Bechtel, like Skanska, like Turner, like Suffolk, have made those major investments, and they've seen the margins increase, they've seen their projects' performance improve, they've seen productivity improvements, so they understand it. So I think it's a combination of those two. But I think over the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen billions of dollars being invested in tech startups in the construction industry. We're seeing that continuing, because people are starting to understand that that really is where we need to go in order to improve the performance characteristic.
Oh, excellent insight. And on the heels of that, in terms of digitization, emerging technologies, what are some of the trends that you feel are positively impacting the industry?
Well, when you look at things like AR or VR, they're being used early on in the life cycle of a project. Many times the parties involved on the owner's side, whether it's a public agency like you've been at or it's a private company, many times people will say, here's what I want this project to be like. Here's what the finished product should be like. But they're not technical people, so they may not understand how it gets represented on drawings or in specifications. So now, through the use of AR and VR tools, people can visualize what the project is actually going to look like. Mm-hmm. I can see it, I can feel it, I can understand, I can walk through it. And so you can see that. So that's been a tremendous help in helping non-technical people realize what this full-size scale model is going to look like. And they can mitigate any kind of changes early on while it's still in the planning phase or early design phase. When you look at the advancement of building information modeling, or BIM, mm-hmm. that has become, it used to be used only in the vertical market, right? Now it's being used in the vertical market, it's being used in infrastructure projects. Every major industry has adopted that. And that has greatly moved the needle to mitigating a lot of the interference problems, a lot of the conflicts that have occurred in jobs. So that's been very advantageous. When you look also at some of the other techniques, other technologies that are advancing that, 3D, 4D and 5D scheduling, where you can simulate the execution and the construction of the project over time, so that you can see the constructability sequence. You can see it on paper, and now you can change it, you can move it back, You can do it a different way. You can optimize the sequencing to prevent delays, to prevent any kind of conflicts like that. So I think a lot of those tools are playing a major part in advancing the improvement and helping in a risk management perspective.
Oh, I appreciate that answer. And on the heels of that question, I'd like to ask, so in terms of qualitative versus quantitative with the technology, what is the differentiator of using one versus the other, or both?
I think you need both, Fred. I think you need to look at both. This has got to be a holistic assessment, right? Because you understand, you've defined your risks, you've identified your dozens or hundreds of risks, you've categorized them. We use a tempo framework. We break them into 5 categories of technical, execution, market, organizational, and political risks. You need a way of making sure that you have high visibility on certain risks. You need to make sure that the most critical risks are the ones that rise up to senior leadership's attention. But you referenced a good publication before. One of the other publications that we had was called The Art of Project Leadership. To run these mega projects, you need to have not just the normal processes that we have for project management, like scheduling, cost control, procurement management, quality control, quality assurance, safety management. All those need to be in place, but the larger and more complex projects require leadership. And that art of project leadership is something we talked about. You need to adopt the mindsets, the 4 mindsets that are the softer side, as you referred to it, that need to take over a project from a leadership perspective. Dealing with things such as, you need to treat this project as a business. You need to treat it in a way that you want everyone to be successful. The idea of you have to lose for me to win is archaic. Right? So we want everyone to succeed. You need to be able to accept the outcomes and own them, as opposed to say it's not my responsibility, but own them and take them and make sure that you deliver them. And you need to make sure that leadership is a constant. So inspiring people, whether it's risk management, problem mitigation, making sure that people continue that, not just as a one-off risk workshop, but throughout the life cycle of the entire project, that takes that mindset and that dynamic in order to make it successful. So that kind of the softer side of the technical side, right?
But it's a very important side, because without the leadership understanding the vision of the entire project life cycle, risk management included, that sets the tone and efficacy of the organization in terms of its success.
Absolutely. It's these large, major, complex projects. You've been involved with many of them. They require a lot more than just technical skills and abilities.
Right.
And we need to look at it like that, and we need to adopt that mindset. And this is a people business. While we have technology and we have equipment and we have manufacturing, this is still a people business. Sure. And it's got to be inspiring in order to lead it like that.
That's a good point. As they say, technologies don't lead projects, people do, right?
Exactly. Perfect. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So Tim, you're an esteemed adjunct associate professor at Columbia University. I'd like to talk about or hear about your journey there and what you're currently doing there.
Well, thanks, Fred. I've always enjoyed public speaking. I've always enjoyed being in front of people, of running training programs. So for many years ago, when I worked for PMA Consultants, I taught at Northeastern University. And I taught in the Graduate School of Engineering for about 16 years. And I finally had to give it up because of my traveling for my job was taking me away, and I wasn't able to really dedicate the time. But I really loved it. Roll forward, when I was working for AECOM, John Dionisio, who was the CEO at the time, agreed to sponsor a program at Columbia called the Global Leaders in Construction Management Program that was founded by my very dear friend, Professor Ibrahim Ode. And John Dionisio asked me to be AECOM's representative to sponsor it. So I worked very closely with Professor Ode, got to know it quite a bit, got to know Columbia very well. He invited me to guest lecture many times, and I really loved it and enjoyed the program. And they were always asking me, come join the faculty, come be part of our organization. And I wasn't able to do it until I finally retired from McKinsey & Company. So about 4 years ago, I joined the faculty at Columbia, as you said, as an adjunct associate professor in the Graduate School of Engineering. I teach one course, Managing Engineering and Construction Processes now, that includes risk management. But I'm also the industry director for the Global Leaders in Construction Management program that Professor O'Day founded, where we take the top students of our program. We engage them in various research projects throughout the year. Professor O'Day will take them on a trip somewhere in the world to see a different part of our industry, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Asia, India, someplace else. And we try to really develop our students. And we also will collaborate with industry, with different companies in the industry, to do various research studies around various topics for them.
Wonderful. And do you find that you get feedback from your graduate students after they've moved on into the industry? Any communication in that regard? Yeah,
the network is vast. The students at Columbia that I found are just, they're very international, very global students. They like to stay in touch. They like to have that relationship. So they will keep us involved. They will bring us into what they're doing. Many of them have invited us to evaluate their new companies that they've started. So it's a great way of staying in touch. The network for the Global Leaders in Construction Management program, and anyone who's interested, you can find it at glcm.info, I-N-F-O, is vast. We have tens of thousands of people in our network that stay connected, and so we have a very good group to reach out to when we want to have surveys done. We want to get industry information, what are the latest trends that they see, so we're able to constantly keep that refreshed.
Interesting. Now, in your tenure of teaching, I understand that you've done some lectures at Harvard. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you did there?
Yeah, I was invited to speak and to present in various courses, guest lecture in the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. I also taught in their exec ed program on infrastructure. They would have an extensive program where they would bring about 20 to 30 people in for a session in the summertime, and I would teach the course on infrastructure. I even lectured one time in the Harvard Business School exec ed program around global sports development and construction. So that was really fun.
So it seems like you have a penchant for teaching, and you love it.
We all have our things that turn us on. You're a triathlete. You're a marathon runner. You love to sing. I enjoy it. It's a gift that I've been blessed with. So I enjoy doing it. Whether it's at Harvard, I also teach at Northeastern University now. Columbia I love, and I find it energizing because I find it forces me to keep smart on things, to see what new trends are coming about, because these students today, they'll challenge you on things, so you better be ready for them.
This is a great way to stay on top of the industry and augment your consulting practice as well.
It's fun, and it's a lot of fun.
When you talked about leadership, leading workshops and getting all the stakeholders together to do the sometimes painful risk identification process. What are some of your tips and insights on how to make that more effective and more not as onerous as, okay, I'm called into this meeting, it's a checkbox, I'm not going to really pay attention, but my boss has forced me to attend this risk workshop. And then how do you get meaningful answers, like when you're doing risk ranging and, low, medium, high, and they're just not really engaged? Do you have any tips or insights from your experience?
Yeah, a couple of things, Fred. It's an interesting point when you look at it like that. One thing that I always try to do at the beginning of any major project is I do what I call a global lessons learned workshop. People look at a project, and as Flyberg would say, people will adopt an optimism bias, thinking that this project is going to go great, we know everything, we're going to be fine, right? What I try to do at the beginning is say, let's look at the last 5 or 10 of other projects that are similar to this one and understand what happened, just like I did with the stadium assessment for Gillette. Look at them in terms of what changes, delays, cost overruns, and why, and make people aware that those people at the beginning of those projects, they all thought this is going to be fine, and it turned out not so fine. Like I said before, the Evidence shows that Flyberg has done and McKinsey has done. The evidence shows that these major projects go over budget and they go over schedule. Let's understand the why that happened, and let's understand what needs to be done in order to mitigate from happening in our project. So I think when you can present real live case studies to the group, it kind of scares them a little bit, makes them realize that, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I hadn't, that can't happen here, right? I said, no, you want to make them aware that this could happen. Flyberg, in his book, Mega Projects and Risk, had a great phrase when he did an assessment for the World Bank, looked at all of their projects and saw their cost overruns and their schedule overruns, and he made the determination that people on those projects used an EGAP method of risk management, EGAP. And I highlighted that, figuring I'll find out what that means. And somebody asked him, said, well, Professor Flyberg, what do you mean by an EGAP method of risk management? He says the people on those projects hoped that everything would go according to plan. They hoped. They didn't have a plan, they didn't have an action, didn't have a risk management strategy, but they hoped. They had an optimism bias. They had an overconfidence bias. And that led to their downfall. So these things happen, and if you don't address them, it can bite you and it can really impact you. And the other thing, I think, when you work on a project, one of the things I try to emphasize with teams and people is, I want you to be successful. You want to be successful. You don't want to get to the end and say, that was the worst job I ever worked on. It was bad for my reputation. It was bad for my company. I wish I was never associated with that. You want to come away safely. You want to come away feeling accomplished. You want to come away feeling I really contributed to something. And that can be done if it's done and it's managed and it's led.
Excellent, excellent. Are there any specific tools or specific practices that you recommend or that you use?
Well, the Project Management Institute has a good risk process and management methodology. The Risk Management Society is another organization that is dedicated to risk management. And this has continued to evolve over time. ISO 31000, I think, is the international standard for risk management that defines the protocols and the good behavior, if you will, right? So it's evolving. I think now what I see, Fred, you talked about technology and digital solutions before. What I'm seeing now is the rise of technology and digital solutions greatly impacting the ability of a risk manager to effect a more effective risk management plan because of the things we talked about before, able to visualize the project, see the problems before they happen, see the construction sequences before they occur. What I'm also excited about is the advancement of AI in our industry. You were asking about this last week when we got together. And if you look at AI, there was a study done by Autodesk and FMI a little while ago, a few years ago, talking about harnessing the data in construction. And the study showed amazingly that if you think of our industry, you think of all the projects that we generate and we execute across all the entire global industry, the data that's generated from our projects is bountiful. But what do people do with it? Do people analyze performance on other projects? Do they do correlations of how well does a project manager actually do over 10 years in their performance of projects? How well does a designer do? How well does a contractor do? What's the safety record across all of my projects? Can I tie it back to anything? So having that data, being able to capture that data on projects through the use of AI and also on other projects and apply it here to put it into a methodology or a formulaic methodology. How can I apply it here, learn from it, and make sure that I can improve my overall performance? I think is going to be a radical step towards risk management in a very, very real way.
Now, more on a personal note, I also know that you're an avid marathoner, an athlete. What are your risk management strategies to stay healthy and fit?
Well, my risk management strategy to stay healthy is I gave up marathon running after my third knee surgery. Gave that up for biking, for walking, being able to play golf with my wife, stay as close to her as I can. She does CrossFit in the morning every day, so I got to keep myself in shape in order to keep up with her.
Oh, that's excellent, excellent. I think what we've learned today is that project risk management needs demystification in order to empower project managers as leaders as well as team members to effectively identify, assess, and mitigate risk throughout the life cycle. I think we've learned a lot here today by having Tim McManus here as our guest. Well, I'd like to thank you for making the trek into New York City to have a discussion on risk management, and we really appreciate you coming in and sharing your insights and input.
Fred, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always great to see you, my friend, and I've really enjoyed being part of this program, and I wish you and PACO and Frank all the best going forward.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks, Fred.